A crowd of displaced people sits in the dust beside a massive irrigation canal in Babylon. The water is thick and slow. By the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept, and we think this is a poem about the quiet, noble sorrow of exile. It sounds like a nightmare. Because the demand for balance leads directly to the most horrifying verse in the entire Psalter. The final two verses of Psalm 137 are almost unbearable to read. O Babylon, you destroyer, happy is the one who repays you according to what you have done to us. Happy is the one who seizes your infants and dashes them against the rocks. It is grotesque. It is visceral. You can hear the horrific sound of shattering bone against limestone. You can see the blood on the stones. For a modern reader sitting in a padded pew, this image feels entirely disconnected from the God of love. It feels like a lapse in inspiration, a moment where the human author's rage overtook the Holy Spirit's editing process. But the psalmist is not inventing this horror. He is simply holding up a mirror. When the Babylonian army breached a city wall, they did not have prisoner of war camps for non-combatants. The standard military tactic of the ancient Near Eastern siege was absolute eradication, to ensure no future generation would rise up to avenge the defeat. Soldiers would literally take the infants of the conquered from their mother's arms, swing them by their ankles, and shatter them against the city walls. The Israelites, writing this psalm, had just watched this happen to their own children. But if you read the text all the way to the 9th verse, the noble sorrow shatters. The song turns dark. The image in verse 9 is not a creative metaphor. It is a historical memory. When the psalmist prays for Babylon's infants to be dashed against the rocks, he is invoking one of the oldest legal codes in human history. It is the principle of lex talionis, the law of exact retaliation, an eye for an eye. In ancient jurisprudence, true justice meant the punishment must perfectly mirror the crime. The cosmic scales could only be balanced if the exact weight of the offense was placed on the other side. But there is an even deeper theological layer hiding in the text. The psalmist is not just citing ancient law, he is quoting a prophet, decades before the fall of Jerusalem. The prophet Isaiah saw a vision of the ultimate destruction of the Babylonian Empire. In Isaiah chapter 13, describing the day Babylon will finally fall to the Medes. The prophet wrote these exact words: "Their infants will be dashed to pieces before their eyes." The author of Psalm 137 knows this scroll. He is sitting by the river, traumatized, violated, and grieving. And he reaches back into the prophetic archives of his own people. He is not creating new theology. He is reminding Yahweh of the old theology. The violent ending is not a random outburst of sadistic fantasy. It ends with an image of violence so shocking, so deeply uncomfortable, that most modern churches refuse to read it aloud. It is a desperate grip on the promises of God. The psalmist is essentially saying, "Lord, you said through Isaiah that Babylon would be judged. You said the violence they poured out on the world would be poured back onto their own heads. Do what you said you would do. Make the nightmare end." It is a prayer for the gears of the universe to finally grind, the abuser to dust. And yet, despite the profound historical and theological context holding this verse together, the modern church has made a nearly unified decision about these words. We have decided they do not belong in the sanctuary. The ink dries on the parchment. The words are heavy. The musicians do not cross them out. They do not edit the trauma to make it sound more pious. They let the raw, bleeding curse stand in the scroll. The Mesopotamian wind blows over the muddy banks of the Euphrates. The harps hang silent in the dead branches. Thousands of years later, you walk into a modern sanctuary. The air is climate-controlled. The light filters smoothly through colored glass. You sit on a polished wooden pew. You open a leather-bound book, your fingers brushing over thin, crisp paper with perfectly typeset font. We sanitize it. We stop at verse 6. We cut the ending out of our liturgy entirely, pretending the writers never said it. And we take this ancient, screaming document, and we perform surgery on it. We read the opening lines. By the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept. We sigh at the beautiful, poetic melancholy. We might even sing the first 4 verses in gentle, 4-part harmony. And then, right before the anger gets uncomfortable, right before the blood hits the limestone, the liturgy stops. We skip verses 7, 8, and 9. We close the book. We fade the piano out. We think we are protecting the congregation from something grotesque. This omission is not an act of reverence. It is an act of erasure. When we sanitize the Psalter, we are making a devastating theological statement to the people sitting in the pews. We are telling the victims of abuse, the refugees who have watched their homes burn, the parents who have buried children, and the betrayed spouses that their rawest emotions are unholy. We are communicating that the sanctuary is only for the healed. We are implying that God only accepts polite prayers with neat resolutions. We treat God like a fragile administrator, who must be protected from the messy reality of human suffering. But the God of the exile does not need to be protected from your pain. He does not ask you to filter your trauma before you approach the throne. The fact that Psalm 137 remains in the biblical canon unedited, uncensored. The real question of this psalm isn't, why are they crying? It's this: why did God let them keep the ending? And permanently etched into the holy text is proof that Yahweh can handle the absolute darkest corners of the human heart. He does not strike the psalmist dead for praying a violent prayer. He absorbs it. He validates the reality of the wound. By cutting out the ending of the song, we do not just silence the ancient victim. We miss the profound psychological and spiritual mechanism that makes the verse so vital. Because the psalmist is not just venting into the void, he is doing something highly specific with his hatred. And the key to understanding how we survive our own trauma is found in exactly where he directs his rage. The human body keeps the score of abuse. You can feel the adrenaline tightening the jaw, the heat rising in the back of the neck, the physical, suffocating weight of unexpressed rage. When a victim is subjected to profound violence, the desire for retaliation is not a theological failure. It is a biological reflex. The psalmist's pen is dripping with that exact venom. He wants blood on the limestone. But notice carefully what the author actually does with the venom. He does not organize a militia. He does not sharpen a piece of bronze and sneak into the Babylonian camp under the cover of night. He does not actually swing an infant against the rocks. He writes a poem. We are terrified of negative emotion in the presence of the divine. We expect the prayers of God's people to be faithful, hopeful, and clean. He directs the violent fantasy entirely toward heaven. This is not a call to arms. It is the surrender of the sword. Theologians call this an imprecatory prayer. It is the deliberate act of taking your most destructive, uncensored rage and handing it over to the judge of the universe. When you have been deeply violated, the anger must go somewhere. If you bury it under polite religious smiles, it rots your bones and turns into a quiet, internal death. If you act on it, you become the very monster who abused you, perpetuating the cycle of violence. The psalmist chooses the holy third way. He takes the darkest, most horrifying desire of his traumatized mind, and he places it directly on the altar of Yahweh. He is essentially saying, I want to shatter them. I want to see them bleed exactly the way they made my family bleed. But I am giving this desire to you, because if I carry it myself, it will destroy me. The prayer is a transfer of jurisdiction by bringing his ugliest, most unsanitized emotion into the presence of God. The exile proves a profound theological truth. He proves that the covenant is strong enough to survive our darkness. God does not demand that we only bring our hallelujahs to the temple. He demands that we bring our truth, even when the truth is terrifying. The violence in the text is actually the alternative to violence in the streets. We expect victims to find the silver lining in their suffering. But the exiled Israelites sitting in the Babylonian dirt do not find a silver lining. When we allow the victims of the world to pray Psalm 137 without censorship, we give them a divine container strong enough to hold their hatred, without it breaking them. We give them permission to be fully human in the presence of the divine. But this raw honesty is not just an ancient psychological coping mechanism. It is the final piece of a pattern that defines the entire biblical narrative. And that pattern leads us to the most uncomfortable, beautiful reality of what happens when you finally stop trying to sing a happy song in a foreign land. The limestone walls shattered in Jerusalem, and the survivors were dragged into the Babylonian dust. The captors demanded a minstrel show of grief, and the musicians refused to perform. The heavy wooden harps were left hanging on the willow branches, and silence became a holy strike. The brothers on the cliffs cheered for the slaughter, and the betrayed demanded cosmic balance. The traumatized victims prayed for blood on the rocks, and heaven absorbed their rage without striking them dead. The raw, unsanitized scream of the exile was written onto a scroll, and the Spirit of God refused to edit it out. A broken people sat by the sluggish waters of the Euphrates, and proved that the covenant can survive the absolute darkest corners of the human heart. One unedited prayer. One God who stays in the ruins. They do not offer a neat theological bow. They offer their actual, bleeding reality. Psalm 137 is not a polite prayer for comfort, but maybe the part that stays with me most is the branches. The heavy stringed instruments sliding over the dark, twisting bark of the willow trees. The deliberate decision to stop the music. The hanging of the harps is not an act of surrender. It is an absolute boundary. The exiles realize that you do not have to put a positive spin on your devastation to prove that your faith is real. If you are in a season where the people around you are demanding that you perform your resilience, if you have been violated, betrayed by someone who was supposed to stand with you, or forced to sit in the ashes of a life you did not choose, you do not have to sing for them. You do not have to sanitize your grief to make the church comfortable. You do not have to smile while your world burns. You are allowed to hang your harp on the tree. You are allowed to take the darkest, most unedited rage of your traumatized mind and place it directly on the altar. And may the God who absorbs the screams of the exiled walk with you by the river. May he hold your deepest anger, so that it does not rot your bones. And may he bring you out, carrying a quiet strength you could not have received. It is the raw, unedited scream of the traumatized. To understand why that scream is holy, any other way. If this opens something in you today, subscribe. Leave a comment, even one word helps. Share this with someone who is exhausted from trying to sing in the dark. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts and why the music had to stop. You have to look at what the captives are holding in their hands. The air smells of strange incense and baked mud. Their captors, the same soldiers who just burned their temple to the ground and slaughtered their neighbors, stand over them. When an empire crushes a nation, the theft of land is only the first phase of the humiliation. The physical violence ends. The ash settles over the ruined city, and the psychological subjugation begins. This is not unique to Babylon. It is the signature of every conquering power in human history. They do not just want your borders, your cattle, and your bronze. They want your joy. They want you to take the very cultural artifacts that used to define your freedom and perform them for their entertainment. Think about the audacity of the request. The Babylonian soldiers have just decimated Jerusalem. They have stripped the gold from the temple doors, slaughtered the priests, and force-marched the survivors across a scorching, featureless desert for hundreds of miles. The sweat and dust of the death march are still caked on their skin. And now, sitting by the slow-moving, muddy canals of the Euphrates, the captors look down at the bleeding, exhausted refugees and demand a melody. The captors want the music of the conquered. It is a profound psychological violation. It forces the victim to manufacture gladness in the presence of their abuser. The Babylonians are not beating them. They are not starving them. They are doing something far more psychological. They are asking for a concert. If the Israelites comply, they are taking the sacred theology of their people, the songs of deliverance, that echoed off the limestone walls of Solomon's temple, and turning them into cheap background music for a Babylonian feast. The request for a song is not a cultural exchange. It is a demand for submission. It is the conqueror saying, "Take the sacred songs of your God, the God we just defeated, and sing them to make us feel good." It is a weaponization of memory. Every note plucked on a string, Every word sung about the beauty of Jerusalem would become a spectacle. The Babylonians want the Israelites to commodify their own trauma. They want the captives to smile while their world burns. We do this to people today. We ask those who are hurting to make their pain palatable for our comfort. We ask the grieving to put on a brave face, to sing a song of faith so that the rest of us do not have to sit in the awkward silence of their devastation. We demand that the broken perform their resilience. But the exiles sitting by the river refuse to perform. They realize that to sing a song of Zion, sing us one of the songs of Zion. In the ancient world, music is the great equalizer. A king plucks a lyre to chase away madness. In the dirt of Babylon is to admit that Zion is just a museum piece, a dead artifact for tourist consumption. To sing would be to accept that Babylon has the final say. So they make a different decision, and it involves a dead tree and a piece of wood. The wind moves through the branches of the willow trees. The branches bend. The leaves rustle over the muddy water of the Euphrates. The musicians of Israel hold their instruments in their laps. These are the kinnerot, the wooden lyres, the stringed harps of the sanctuary. They played these at the harvest festivals. They played them while the high priest walked up the limestone steps. They played them when the smoke of the altar filled the Holy of Holies and the people fell on their faces. Now, the wood is cracked from the desert heat. The strings are coated in ash. The musicians look at their captors. They look at the sluggish river. They look at the dark, twisting bark of the trees. They do not tune the strings. They do not hum a starting pitch. They stand up. They walk to the water's edge. They lift the harps. They slide the heavy wooden frames over the thick, drooping branches. They let go. The strings vibrate softly in the wind. A shepherd sings in the shadow of a dark valley. A liberated nation sings on the safe side of a collapsed sea. The musicians turn around. They sit back down in the dirt. They cross their arms. The silence stretches across the riverbank. This is not a gesture of defeat. It is a holy strike. By hanging the harps on the willows, they are refusing to let the sacred become the profane. They are declaring an absolute boundary. The Babylonians can take the gold from the treasury. The Babylonians can burn the heavy cedar gates. The Babylonians can march their bodies across 1,000 miles of wasteland. But the Babylonians cannot have the song. The music belongs to Yahweh. The joy belongs to Jerusalem. If the temple is quiet, the harps will be quiet. It is an act of ultimate, bloodless defiance. A captive with no sword cannot strike back. A captive with no land cannot retreat. A captive in chains cannot run. But a captive with a harp can refuse to play. The silence of the instruments screams louder than any melody ever could. They sit in the dust. They stare at the dangling wood. They let the Mesopotamian wind play the strings. They draw a line in the Babylonian sand. We will weep. We will remember. We will endure. But we will not entertain you. Same response again and again. You sing to document the miracle. You sing to survive the waiting. But the silence on the riverbank does not end the confrontation. The refusal to sing only forces the tension higher. Because the Babylonians are not just casually asking for a background melody to pass the time, they are demanding a very specific, aggressive kind of performance. And the Hebrew word the psalmist uses to describe their demand reveals exactly what the captors are trying to extract from the victims. The English translations of Psalm 137 verse 3 usually read something like this: "For there, our captors required of us songs, and our tormentors, mirth." It sounds almost like a request for evening entertainment. You can imagine a Babylonian officer, his breath smelling of thick Mesopotamian wine, casually asking the refugees for a local tune to pass the time. We read the English and assume a callous but casual interaction. But the word the psalmist uses for these tormentors is the Hebrew tolalanu. It is a rare, aggressive word. Translators often struggle to capture its weight. But ancient linguists trace its root to a verb meaning to mock, to plunder, or to make a howling spectacle. It carries the energy of a predator playing with a wounded animal. The Babylonians are not politely asking for a cultural showcase. They are demanding a minstrel show of grief. They want the Israelites to take the holy. Reverberating hymns. Music is how the human spirit breathes when the lungs are crushed. Most people assume Psalm 137 is just a melancholy hymn of homesickness, of their crushed sanctuary, and perform them like circus animals doing tricks in the ashes of their own homes. If reading the Bible not as a flat textbook but as a bleeding, breathing document is shifting something inside you, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Because every week we go into the original languages to find the reality hiding beneath the English. So the musicians choose the silence of the willow trees. They recognize the theological trap hidden inside Tol Aleinu. In the ancient Near East, the rules of war were also the rules of heaven. When your capital city was burned and your limestone walls were breached, it meant your God was weak. Marduk defeated Yahweh. That was the undisputed theology of the empire. By asking for a song of Zion, the Babylonians are essentially asking the Israelites to sing a public eulogy for a defeated deity. They want the captives to admit, through their own sacred melodies, that the God of Abraham is dead and buried in the rubble. The request for a song is not a naive desire for music. It is a calculated act of spiritual strip mining. By keeping their mouths closed, the Israelites are insisting that Yahweh is still alive. The silence is a theological rebellion, a beautiful, tragic ballad about a displaced people longing for their homeland. You have probably heard it set to music, but this rebellion is only the beginning of the psalm's dark turn. Because while the musicians stare at the Babylonians standing over them with bronze spears, their minds suddenly drift away from the Euphrates to another enemy entirely. An enemy who did not hold a Babylonian sword, but whose betrayal cut much deeper. And to understand the horror of the final verses, you have to look at who was standing on the cliffs when Jerusalem fell. The battering rams strike the limestone. The walls crack. The cedar gates catch fire. The smoke blocks out the sun. Babylonian soldiers flood the streets. They carry torches. They carry heavy bronze swords. The narrow stone alleys of Jerusalem run thick with blood. The temple treasury is gutted. The priests are slaughtered in the courtyards. It is a scene of total, apocalyptic collapse. But as the musicians sit by the river months later, their memory flashes to a different detail. Look up at the hills surrounding the city. Look at the ridges to the south. Someone is watching the slaughter, and they are cheering. It is the nation of Edom, the descendants of Esau, Jacob's twin brother. The people of Israel and the people of Edom share a bloodline. They share a history. They share an ancestor. When foreign empires marched through the ancient Levant, these two nations were supposed to have each other's backs. But when the Babylonians finally break through the defenses of Jerusalem, the Edomites do not send help. It has been turned into pop hits, reggae anthems, and gentle choral masterpieces. We read the opening lines. They do not send troops. They stand on the cliffs and watch it burn. The psalmist remembers the exact words they chanted while the sanctuary fell. Lay it bare. Lay it bare. Down to its foundations. The deepest wound is not the Babylonian sword. It is the Edomite cheer. The Babylonians were a pagan empire doing exactly what pagan empires do. They conquer. They consume. It is brutal, but it is expected. The Edomites were family. They stood by the roads, intercepting terrified Israelite refugees and handing them over to the Babylonian death squads. They walked into the city and looted the burning houses after the soldiers moved on. The trauma of the exile is completely entangled with the trauma of this betrayal. You cannot separate the pain of the captivity from the sting of the brother who sold you out. When the psalmist cries out in verse 7, "Remember, O Lord, against the Edomites, the day of Jerusalem," it is a raw demand for cosmic justice. The victims are not praying for peace. They are praying for the universe to be put right. They are staring at their dangling harps, listening to the rushing water of the Euphrates, and realizing that a God of justice cannot simply ignore what happened on those hills. The scales are completely broken. The blood is still crying out, from the limestone pavement. And when the traumatized demand that the scales be balanced, the language they use does not sound like a polite church service.